I want to tell you something that took me 56 years to understand about myself. Not because I was slow. Not because I was unobservant. I had spent my entire adult life being paid to notice things, details, patterns, the small inconsistencies that other people walked right past. I was good at my work. I was considered, by most people who knew me professionally, to be unusually perceptive. And yet I had walked past the most important detail of my own life for 5.5 decades without once stopping to look at it directly. Her name was Caroline. My wife. The woman who had been watching me, with the patience of someone who knows the right moment will arrive eventually, for nearly 15 years before the night everything changed. The night I fell into her world. I did not fall dramatically. There was no single moment where the ground disappeared, and I found myself somewhere completely new. It was more like the way water finds its level slowly, quietly, following the natural shape of things, until you look up one day and realize you are somewhere entirely different from where you started, and that the somewhere different is exactly where you were always supposed to be. Caroline knew this before I did. She always knew things before I did. It was, in the early years of our marriage, mildly irritating. Later, it became the thing I was most grateful for. Now, standing on the other side of the most profound change of my life, I understand that her knowing, her quiet, steady, utterly patient knowing, was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. My name is Gerald. I am 56 years old. And this is the story of how I fell into my wife's world and what I found when I got there. I grew up in a household that ran on routine. My father was an accountant, precise, methodical, a man whose idea of relaxation was balancing the household budget to the penny on Sunday evenings. My mother taught high school English, which made her, in the context of our family, the emotional one, the one who brought color and language and feeling into a house that might otherwise have been entirely organized around spreadsheets. I loved them both. I learned from both of them. From my father, I learned precision and the comfort of things in their proper order. From my mother, I learned to love stories, not just to read them, but to feel them, to let a good narrative reach inside you and rearrange something. What I did not learn, growing up in that house, was how to talk about what was happening inside me. My father did not do that. The men in his life did not do that. The world I grew up in had a clear and unwavering understanding of what men did and did not discuss, what they did and did not feel, what they did and did not allow to show. I absorbed this understanding completely, the way children absorb everything that is presented to them, as simply the way things are. By the time I was a teenager, I had become very good at the inside-outside split, at being one thing in public and carrying something quieter and harder to name in private, at moving through the expected life, sports, school, friends, the whole performance, while something else entirely ran in the background like a second program, patient and persistent, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come. I did not know what to call what I carried. I had no language for it, and no one around me who might have offered some. I just knew that when I was alone, truly alone, in the way that adolescents sometimes are, I felt more like myself. More comfortable, more at ease in my own skin. And that more like myself feeling had a quality to it that I couldn't examine too closely without the management reflex activating. So, I didn't examine it. I managed it, efficiently, automatically, with the precision my father had taught me. I managed it for 30 years before Caroline. I met Caroline at 38. Late, by some measures. Late enough that I had stopped expecting it, not marriage specifically, but the particular thing that marriage at its best is supposed to be. The finding of someone who sees you, really sees you. I had been in relationships before Caroline. 2 serious ones, several less serious. In all of them, I had been present in the way I was present in most things, competent, attentive, warm enough, but never fully there. Never all the way in. The second program was always running, and it took up space, and eventually the women I was with would sense the distance and either ask about it or simply grow tired of it. Caroline did neither. Caroline arrived at the distance, looked at it for a moment, and then simply moved closer. Not through it, she was too smart for that. Around it. The way water moves around an obstacle, not by confronting it but by finding the paths on either side and gradually surrounding it until the obstacle is no longer the point. We met at a gallery opening. A friend of mine was showing work, and I had been dragged along by the same friend's wife. Caroline was there because she knew the artist through a different channel entirely. We ended up standing in front of the same painting at the same time. The painting was of a woman at a window, seen from behind. Nothing dramatic in the subject, just a figure, a window, the suggestion of light from outside. But there was something about the quality of the figure's stillness. The way she seemed to be both looking out and retreating in at the same time, both present and elsewhere. She looks like she's deciding something, Caroline said. I hadn't noticed anyone standing beside me. I turned. She was looking at the painting, not at me, a woman with dark hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression of genuine engagement with what she was looking at. What is she deciding? I asked. Caroline tilted her head. Whether to stay where she is or go somewhere new. Whether the window is a barrier or an invitation. She finally looked at me. What do you think? I looked back at the painting, at the woman at the window with her quality of being both present and elsewhere. I think she's been standing there for a while, I said. I think she knows what she wants to do. She's just working up the nerve. Caroline looked at me for a long moment. Yes, she said. That's exactly it. We talked for the rest of the evening. I drove her home. We had dinner 3 days later. 2 years after that, we got married in her mother's garden on a warm June afternoon, and I felt, standing beside her under the archway her sister had decorated, that I had arrived somewhere I hadn't known I was looking for. The second program kept running. But for the first time, it felt less like something to be managed, and more like something that was waiting, with the patience of something that knows it will eventually be given room. Caroline was an artist. Not in the gallery opening sense, not primarily. She was a working artist, practical and disciplined about it, someone who got up every morning and went to her studio the way other people went to offices, with the focused intention of someone who has made peace with their work and with the uncertainty that comes with it. She worked in textiles. Fabric, thread, the construction of things from component parts. She had strong opinions about texture and color and the relationship between material and meaning, and she could talk about these things for a long time without losing either her precision or her enthusiasm. I loved listening to her talk about her work. I loved the way the technical vocabulary of it mixed with the emotional vocabulary, the way she could move, in a single sentence, from the properties of a particular weave to what that weave made her feel. She brought this attention to everything around her, to her home, which was full of things chosen for how they felt as much as how they looked, to the food she cooked, which was always about texture as much as flavor.
To me.
She paid attention to me the way she paid attention to materials, with genuine curiosity about what I was made of, what I responded to, where the interesting properties were. She was not analyzing me. She was just genuinely interested. And her interest had a quality of patience that I had not encountered before. She was not in a hurry to reach a conclusion. She was content to keep looking. In the first years of our marriage, I watched her do this with a combination of gratitude and mild apprehension. The gratitude was because being seen, really seen, is one of the most nourishing things a person can experience, and I had been undernourished in that particular way for a long time. The apprehension was because some part of me understood that a person who paid that quality of attention would eventually see everything, including the things I had been managing. I was right about that. She saw everything. She just chose her moment very carefully. The first thing I noticed changing was the bathroom. This sounds like the most mundane possible observation, and it is, and that is exactly the point. The changes that Caroline introduced into my life began in the most ordinary places, with the most ordinary things, in the most matter-of-fact way. She did not sit me down and propose a plan. She did not make anything into a conversation before it needed to be one. She just began quietly and naturally, the way she began any creative project, by changing the materials of the environment and watching what happened. The bathroom acquired new soap. She had ordered it for herself, she said, from a small maker's sheet found online. It smelled like cedar and something floral underneath, and the texture of it was different from what I'd been using, richer, more considered. She left it on the ledge of the shower without comment. I used it. It was excellent soap. I thought nothing of it. The bathroom also acquired, over the following months, a different moisturizer for both of us, she said, because the winter was dry and her skin had been suffering. a new shampoo, a different razor, with a heavier handle that felt more substantial in the hand. None of these things arrived with explanation. They arrived as improvements, as the natural upgrading of ordinary things that Caroline did periodically throughout our home and our life. I received them as improvements and moved on. But I was using them. That was what Caroline had understood. I was using them and responding to them in the quiet way of someone receiving exactly what they need, and the response was visible to someone paying the quality of attention that she paid. She told me later that she had begun to build a picture during these months. Not of who I should become, she was very clear about this, but of who I already was. Of what I responded to, what I was drawn to, where the texture of my actual self showed through the texture of my managed self. She was patient. She had the patience of someone who knows that the right material, applied correctly, will eventually do exactly what it was meant to do. The clothes came next. This took longer, nearly a year of other small changes before the first garment appeared. Caroline was not rushing. She was building. She had always been interested in what I wore, in the gentle and practical way of someone with a good eye who shares her life with someone. She had occasionally suggested things over the years, and I had generally trusted her judgment, and the suggestions had generally been improvements. So when she came home one afternoon with something she'd found while shopping and thought might suit me, I received it the way I'd received everything else she'd chosen for me. It was a scarf. Long, soft, in a deep charcoal with a very faint pattern woven into it, something abstract, almost invisible unless the light hit it right. The fabric was extraordinary. I didn't know what it was made of, and I didn't ask. I just held it and felt the weight and the softness, and something shifted very slightly in the region of my chest. "Try it," Caroline said, from across the room where she was unpacking the rest of the bag. I put it on. It settled around my shoulders in a way that felt I searched for the word and couldn't find it. Not comfortable exactly, though it was that. Something more precise. Something more like right. I was wearing it when I went to make dinner that evening. I forgot I was wearing it. Caroline, sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine, watched me move around the kitchen and said nothing, but I could see, in my peripheral vision, the quality of her attention. Later, doing the dishes, I caught the reflection of the scarf in the dark window over the sink. I looked at it for a moment. Something registered. Something I didn't examine. "I like this," I said. "I know," Caroline said. There was something in the way she said it. Something that was more than agreement. I turned to look at her, but she had gone back to her book, and her expression was the focused, private one that meant she was inside whatever she was reading. I turned back to the dishes. But the something had registered. There is a particular kind of self-knowledge that you can't arrive at directly. Some things about yourself cannot be approached head-on the moment you try to look at them squarely. The management reflex activates and moves them out of the line of sight. They can only be approached sideways, through accumulated small experiences that bypass the reflex and build a picture in the peripheral vision until the picture is large enough and clear enough that looking away from it becomes harder than looking at it. Caroline understood this. It was, I think, instinctive for her. She had spent her career working with materials that required patience and indirection, that revealed their properties only when you stopped forcing them and let them show you. She had transferred this understanding, with perfect naturalness, to the situation at hand. And the situation at hand was this. She had known, for most of our marriage, that I was carrying something I hadn't looked at directly. She had seen it in the way I moved in certain spaces and not others, in the way certain things called to me and I automatically turned away from them, in the long-practiced ease of my own management. She had known and she had waited, adding things to my environment carefully and watching my responses carefully, building the sideways picture piece by piece. By the time the scarf appeared, the picture was already quite detailed. By the time what came next arrived, it was nearly complete. What came next arrived on a Sunday morning in April, about 18 months after the scarf. We had been married for 12 years by then. The spring had come early, and the light through the bedroom windows was the particular gold of early April, warm and clean. Caroline had been in her studio the previous afternoon, and she came home with a bag that she set on the bed without explanation and started unpacking with a focused efficiency of someone who has decided something and is now executing. "I want to show you something," she said. And I want you to not say anything until after you've tried it.
Can you do that?
I looked at the bag. What is it? That's saying something, she pointed out. That's asking something. Same rule, she said, and she was smiling that particular smile that was warm and private and full of something I couldn't quite read. Just wait. She laid things out on the bed. A blouse soft, in a warm cream, with a drape to it that I recognized as the quality of good fabric. Wide-leg trousers in a deep navy. A long open cardigan in gray. Small earrings, clip-on, silver, simple. A pair of low shoes, simple and clean. I looked at the arrangement on the bed. I looked at it for a long time. The management reflex activated. I could feel it, the familiar automatic tensing, the reaching for deflection, the impulse to make a joke or change the subject or gently redirect the situation back to safer ground. And then something else happened. Something that had been building for 18 months of soap and scarves and small accumulations of exactly the right thing. Something that had been building for 56 years, actually, waiting in the very back of everything for exactly this moment. The management reflex activated, and then it simply did not take hold. For the first time in my life, I picked up the blouse. I held it. The fabric was everything I would have expected from Caroline's choices considered, precise, exactly right. Okay, I said. Caroline helped me. She moved around me with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to her work, adjusting, assessing, making small decisions about proportion and fit with the professional confidence of someone who has been thinking about this for a very long time. She treated the whole process as entirely natural, because for her it was entirely natural. She had been building toward this for years, and now that it was here, she was simply doing what she had always done. Working with the materials in front of her to reveal what was already there. When she was done, she stepped back. Mirror, she said. The mirror was the full-length one on the back of the closet door. I turned to face it, and I fell. That is the only word for what happened. I fell into the reflection the way you fall into deep water, not violently, not with impact, but completely. All at once. The way the surface of something gives way, and you find yourself inside it before you've fully registered the moment of entry. The person in the mirror was me. Completely and entirely me, my face, my hands, my height and build. But the overall picture had shifted in a way that I had no previous experience of, no framework for, no managed response ready. The picture was right, not in a small way, in the largest possible way. In the way that something is right when it has been waiting a long time to be allowed to be right, and the waiting is finally over. I stood there for a very long time. Caroline stood beside me.
She did not speak.
She knew, I think, that there were no words that were better than the silence, and that the silence needed to be allowed to do its work. When I finally turned to look at her, my face was doing something I couldn't control. Not distress. The opposite of distress. The kind of feeling that, when it is large enough and real enough, arrives in the eyes before it arrives in any words you might try to find for it. How long have you known? I said. My voice was completely steady, which surprised me. Since about year 3, she said. Maybe earlier. 9 years. Give or take. I looked back at the mirror. At the person who was me and also, somehow, more me than I had ever been in any reflection in any mirror in 56 years of looking. Why didn't you say anything? I thought showing would work better than saying, she said. For you specifically. I considered that. Considered the soap and the scarf and the 18 months of small careful additions, the picture built sideways, the management reflex bypassed with the patience of someone who understood how it worked and where its edges were. You were right, I said. I usually am, she said. And the warmth in her voice was so complete, so entirely without any quality of triumph or told you so, that I laughed. I stood in front of that mirror in my wife's cream blouse and navy trousers and laughed, and she laughed with me, and that laughter was the sound of something very old and very heavy finally being put down. What followed was a period of discovery that I find difficult to describe without either understating or overstating it. It was not dramatic. It was not a crisis or a revolution or any kind of sudden overturning of my life. My life remained, in most of its external facts, exactly what it had been. I went to work. I came home. I had dinner with my wife and watched certain television programs and read before bed and did all the things that constitute the ordinary fabric of an ordinary life. But inside that ordinary fabric, something had changed. Something fundamental and permanent and completely irreversible had changed, in a way that things change when you finally look at them directly after a long time of looking sideways. I began to understand myself. For the first time, at 56 years old, I began to actually understand what I was made of, what I had been carrying, what the second program had been running all those years. Caroline was my guide in this. Not in a directive way, she was never directive. That was not her nature. But she knew things I didn't know yet, and she offered them when I was ready for them, and not before. She had, over 9 years of watching and waiting and building the sideways picture, arrived at a detailed and careful understanding of who I was, and she shared this understanding with me gently and precisely, the way you share something valuable with someone who is just learning its worth. We talked more than we had ever talked. Not about the situation specifically, not cataloging and analyzing and working through it clinically, but just honestly. The kind of honesty that becomes possible when the biggest thing has been said. When the management reflex has finally stood down and left the room. Suddenly, everything was speakable. Suddenly, every conversation could go to the real place rather than stopping at the surface. I told her things I had never told anyone. About the boy who felt everything in that specific place in his chest and learned to keep it quiet. About the decades of management. About every moment I could remember of something calling to me and the reflex moving me away from it. She listened to all of it the way she listened to everything completely, without rushing to respond, without filling in the silences with her own words. And then she said things back to me that were so precisely right, so exactly true to what I had described, that I understood she had been holding the shape of me in her mind for years, keeping it safe until I could hold it myself. My daughter Vivian was 24 when I told her. She was living in Seattle, working at a nonprofit she cared deeply about, and we spoke every week on Sunday mornings in the easy and affectionate way we always had. I had been thinking about how to tell her for weeks, drafting and discarding approaches, trying to find the version that was honest and clear without being overwhelming, that gave her room to respond however she needed to respond. In the end, I just told her, plainly, directly, the way she had always preferred things. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Dad, can I say something without it sounding wrong?"
Please, I said.
I feel like I've been waiting for this conversation for about 5 years.
I sat with that.
You noticed something. I've always noticed something, she said. Not this specifically. Just there was always this quality to you. Like you were in a room, but also standing slightly outside it, looking in. And I could never figure out what the window was made of.
A pause.
Does that make sense? It made complete sense. It was the exact same metaphor Caroline had used about the woman in the painting years ago on the night we met. The quality of being both present and elsewhere. Both looking out and looking in. Caroline says something similar, I said. Well, she's been married to you for 12 years, Vivian said. She probably sees it more clearly than I do. Another pause.
Dad.
Yes. Are you happy? Like, actually happy? I'm getting there, I said honestly. I'm happier than I've been in I think in my whole life, actually. It's early still.
But yes.
Then that's what matters, she said. Simply and completely. That's the whole thing. We talked for another hour. About what it had felt like, growing up with this. About Caroline and what she had done. About what I was learning about myself, and what I was still uncertain of. Vivian asked questions that were good questions, the kind that came from genuine curiosity and genuine care, and I answered them as honestly as I could. When we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of the study and thought about what she'd said. 5 years. She had been carrying that noticing for 5 years without knowing what to do with it, without a way to ask. In protecting my own carefully managed privacy, I had left my daughter with an unanswered question for 5 years. I called her back the same day to say that. She told me to stop. She told me that I had done the best I could with what I had, and that the important thing was now, and that she loved me without qualification, which she said in exactly those words, and which I will carry with me for the rest of my life. My son, Andrew, took longer. He was 28, a contractor, living 40 minutes away. We saw each other regularly, worked on projects together sometimes, had the comfortable and functional relationship of two people who are genuinely fond of each other and share a practical language. He was not, by nature, someone who engaged easily with things that required emotional vocabulary. He was, in that way, more like the man I used to be than the man I was becoming. I told him on a Saturday at his house, while we were supposed to be looking at some work he needed to do on his garage. We walked around the garage for a while first, talking about the project, and then we sat on the steps at the back of his house with coffee, and I told him. He listened without interrupting, the way he listened to everything with his hands around his mug, and his eyes on the middle distance processing. When I finished, he was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, "Is this why you and Mom never seemed quite?" He stopped. Started again. "There was always this thing, where I couldn't quite get all the way to you, like you were behind something." "Yes," I said. "Probably that. Yes." He nodded slowly. "Okay." A pause. "So now you're not behind it." "Now I'm not behind it." Another silence. Andrew was never quick with words, and I had learned, over years of being his father, to not fill the silences he needed. "Is Caroline okay?" he said. "She's better than okay," I said. "She knew before I did. She's been helping me get here for years." He looked at me then. "She knew? Since about year 3 of our marriage." He turned back to the middle distance. "Huh." A long pause. "That's she's something, Caroline." "She is," I agreed. We sat for a while longer. Then Andrew said, "I need to think about this. Not because I have a problem with it, but because I need to think about it." "Of course," I said. "But I'm not going anywhere," he said. Same words his sister had used almost exactly, as if they had both independently arrived at the same understanding of what needed to be said. "Just so you know, I'm not going anywhere." He called me 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening and talked for an hour. He had questions, practical ones, mostly the kind that came from trying to understand the mechanics of a situation rather than the emotions of it. But they were honest questions, asked without judgment, and I answered them as honestly as I could. At the end of the call, he said, "I told Claire," his wife, a woman I was very fond of. "I hope that's okay." "Of course," I said. She said. He paused. "She said she always thought there was something unusually gentle about you. For a man of your generation." She said it made sense. I sat with that for a moment. Something unusually gentle. 40 years of management and it had still shown through. Claire, whom I had known for 6 years, had seen it. Everyone had seen it, apparently. Everyone except me. There is a morning I come back to often, in the way that certain mornings stay with you, not because anything dramatic happened, but because of the specific quality of the ordinary. It was about 10 months after the Sunday in April. Late winter, the light just beginning to change back toward warmth, that particular quality of February morning light that suggests spring without committing to it yet. I was getting dressed for a day at home, no office, just the quiet of the house and some reading I'd been planning. I stood at the closet. My closet, which had over the preceding months evolved with Caroline's help into something that actually reflected who I was, the colors I was drawn to, the fabrics that felt right, the gradual and considered expansion of what I understood my own aesthetic to be. I chose what I was going to wear the way Caroline chose things, with attention. Not quickly or automatically, but with genuine consideration of what felt right for the day, for the light, for the person I was. I dressed. I looked in the mirror. The person looking back was familiar now. I had grown used to the familiarity. But on this particular morning, in this particular light, I looked at the reflection for a long moment and felt something that I want to try to describe accurately. It was not triumph. It was not relief, though it contained some relief. It was not even happiness, though it was warm. It was recognition. The recognition you feel when you meet someone you have been separated from for a very long time, and the meeting is not surprising because some part of you always knew this person existed and always knew you would find each other eventually. Not surprise. Not shock. Just the deep, steady, completely certain feeling of, there you are. There I was. I had been there all along, as it turned out, waiting in the very back of everything, patient as anything, for exactly as long as it took. The second program had not been running a stranger. It had been running me, the real me, the complete me, the version that hadn't yet been given room to come forward. Caroline appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. She had her coffee and her reading glasses and the expression she wore in the early morning when the day was still quiet and full of possibility. She looked at me, not with the assessing eye of someone checking her work, but with the warm and completely relaxed eye of someone looking at something they love.
Good morning, she said. Good morning, I said.
She came and stood beside me at the mirror. We looked at the reflection, the two of us, side by side, in the February morning light. You look like yourself, she said. I know, I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder for just a moment. Then she went to make more coffee, and I stood for another moment in front of the mirror, and the person looking back at me was someone I was, finally, entirely glad to know. I want to say something about what Caroline did because I have been thinking about it since the beginning, and I want to say it as precisely as I can. What she did was not a project. It was not an intervention. It was not an experiment or a transformation program or anything with a clinical shape. What Caroline did was see me actually see me in the complete and specific way that requires patience and attention and the willingness to look at what is actually there rather than what you expect or prefer to be there, and then make space for what she saw. Make space. That is the phrase I keep arriving at. She made space in our home, in our life, in the daily texture of our existence. Small spaces at first, the soap, the scarf, the objects that arrived without announcement and settled into the environment as if they had always been there. Larger spaces later. The conversation, the Sunday in April, the mirror. She made space and she waited, with the patience of someone who understood that space is where things grow, that you cannot rush what needs to grow in its own time, that the job of the person who loves you is not to tell you who you are, but to create the conditions in which you can find out for yourself. This is, I think, one of the rarest things one person can do for another. I had been carrying the unexpressed version of myself for 56 years. Carrying it the way you carry something you've been told is too heavy to put down, not because it was ever actually too heavy, but because no one had ever shown you a place where you were allowed to set it. Caroline showed me the place. And the moment I set it down, I understood that I had been carrying it so long that I had forgotten it was separate from me. Forgotten there was a me that existed underneath it. Forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without the weight. Standing upright there is no other word extraordinary. At 56 years old, to discover what it feels like to stand completely upright inside your own life. I am 56 years old. I have a wife who loved me well enough and patiently enough to see me before I could see myself, and to build, over years and years of careful attention, the path back to myself. I have a daughter in Seattle who said she loves all the complicated versions and meant it completely. I have a son 40 minutes away who needed time and took it, and then called on a Tuesday evening and asked honest questions and ended the call by saying he wasn't going anywhere. I have a mirror I can stand in front of every morning without searching for something that isn't quite right. I have, for the first time in my life, the experience of being fully present in my own existence. Not performing it, not managing it, actually living it, from the inside out, with the complete and permanent and irreversible sense of being exactly who I am. If you are watching this and you recognize something in it, if you have your own second program, your own management reflex, your own version of the gap between the presented self and the real one, then I want to say something to you directly. You are not alone in this. The experience of carrying yourself quietly alongside yourself for years and years, of living at a slight angle to your own life, of being almost right but not quite, this experience is shared by more people than you might imagine. More people than will ever say it out loud. And it is never too late to set the weight down. I want to say that with as much conviction as I have, which is considerable, because I am saying it from the specific experience of a man who set it down at 56 and found that the ground beneath him was completely solid. You do not need a Caroline, though, if you have one, if you have someone in your life who pays that quality of attention and carries that quality of patience, let them in. Stop blocking the door. They are not a threat to the managed version of you. They are the ally of the real version. And if you are doing this alone without a Caroline, then let me offer what I can from here. The sideways picture builds itself eventually. The space finds its own way of opening. The things you have been carrying know how to set themselves down when a moment comes, if you let the moment come. Let the moment come. Caroline fell in love with the real version of me years before I knew the real version existed. She fell in love with something she could see and I couldn't, and she loved it patiently and carefully and completely until I could see it too. I fell into her world, as the title of this story says. But what I found when I got there was not her world at all. It was mine. It had always been mine. I just needed someone to show me the way in. The window in the painting, from the night we met the woman standing at it, deciding whether it was a barrier or an invitation. Caroline was right, as she was about most things. It was an invitation. It was always an invitation. I just took 56 years to walk through it.
And on the other side, myself.
Complete, present, standing upright in the warm light of an ordinary morning. That is the whole story. That is everything.